right, everyone. Here we are back once again on the Tyler Hill podcast. I have someone I'm really excited to talk about. It's so fun when friends recommend friends, friends who know you well, who know what you're about, and they introduce you to people that know what you're about. So I'm so excited to give who I'm sure will be a new friend, Tracey Gee, a chance to share about her magic. Tracey, welcome to the Tyler Hill podcast.
Thank you so much, Tyler.
So before we talk about all your wisdom and all the ways in which you help people in this world, we're more than what we teach. We're more than the work we do.
Mm.
Let's say you have a couple $100, you have a free weekend all to yourself. What makes you come alive? What's that hobby that you do that it's not about the money, it's not about the work. This is just Tracy's get to do thing.
Ooh, this is a very fun question. Well, my husband and I have been on a kick of visiting as many coffee shops as we humanly possibly
Mhm.
can. So we
Yes.
like to go and we like to like look and see like what do we think of the ambience? What do we think of the coffee? He's a huge coffee
Okay.
snob, very much more than me. What are the treats like? And we just like to visit different spots in our neighborhood and find the different gems. So yeah, if I had a couple $100, we would for sure be hitting up at least a couple of those and maybe
Love
new
it.
ones on our list. Also a ginormous dog person, so can't get enough of my dog. That would be free, I think, to just hang out with her. She's usually, except for the vet, pretty low cost. And then, if I had some money left over right now, I'm really craving silence. So I feel the need for more silence in my life than I've experienced in the last 6 months.
Mm.
Life has felt very noisy. So I think I would appreciate some time alone, maybe even like a overnight, a retreat center, or a little mini escape. Hmm.
I love that. And you are in Southern California, is that correct?
I'm in Los Angeles. Yeah.
That's right. So you don't know this again, we're just getting to know each other. I owned a coffee company for a very long time and
What?
before I got into the helping professions and spent a lot of time in Southern California. So I have to ask you about some of your spots that you do
Okay.
love out there. What's some of the ones that
Okay.
that you all love?
Oh, this is very okay. So we love a place. I don't know if you would know this because I think it's only been around for maybe a couple years. I want to say
Mhm.
it's called Jurassic Magic.
I do not know that.
So we really love that place. Very cool, very funky, great coffee, great people. We just discovered it's like it's called Roseland Cafe, and it's truly just like in someone's driveway.
Cool.
They only run it Wednesday through Friday. It's like this older Latino grandpa, like abuelo type, like making the coffee, delicious Americano, and they sell coffee and pastries and tamales. So that was amazing. That was a great find. We just tried that one last week and loved it. Um, yeah, so and then there's some like, kind of fancier ones. We
Mhm.
tried Andante a couple weeks ago and
Okay,
that was really good. Yeah.
cool.
Hmm.
Yeah, I can remember back in the day when like shops like Intelligentsia, like there was a day where there was only like three of those.
That's right. Yeah.
And have you ever made your way around like Go Get 'em Tiger or
Love. Yes.
G&B?
Yes.
Yeah, one of the founders there is actually from Colorado Springs. The B in G&B, which I think they're all Go Get 'em Tiger now, but
Yes.
anyways, is Charles Babinski. And then there's also Menotti's. Have you ever been to Menotti's? It's in
Only once.
Venice. There's this legend. In fact, uh, there's this legend, a Puerto Rican barista legend named Nicely,
You have
and
the deeds.
he's just a legend. His name's Nicely, just been a coffee god pretty much for forever,
Oh my
and
gosh.
he has a shop in Venice called Menotti's that's like teeny tiny little thing.
Yeah.
And he's like a skater, just proud Puerto Rican, just so fun, loves Lego, like he's just the coolest guy. Anyways, I
Very
could talk coffee
cool.
forever and
Oh
ever.
my gosh. I love
Um,
it. I love it.
oh, that's
What's your
really fun.
go-to order? Like, do you have a go-to order or do you mix it
Yeah.
up?
I mean, it depends on like what kind of shop it is. Like if it's
Mm,
fancier, then I'm probably going towards like an espresso and a filtered coffee and just
mm,
really letting the coffee be what it is.
hmm.
But I'm very like, the more I'm in the industry, the less pretentious I've gotten. I hope. I have been very pretentious in my day. But these days, like, I think if somebody says they don't like vanilla lattes, like they're a liar. Like it's just sweet and creamy and so yummy. So a good
Yes.
like iced vanilla latte, especially if I'm in California.
Yeah.
I mean, I that just brings me a lot of joy. My other answer to that would be there was a year, my wife and I, before we had kids, we spent like we did like 7 days at Disneyland during Christmas time.
Oh, wow.
And every morning, I would get a peppermint mocha at Starbucks, and everybody would say, Tyler talks about Starbucks. But the nostalgia of that flavor
Mm,
with that
mm,
season
mm.
is just magic. And so
Yeah.
even now, it's like it hits, you hit December or November,
Yeah.
and I'm at Starbucks way more than I'd like to admit. Because that nostalgia gets you,
Yeah.
you know?
It does. It does. That's real.
Um, there's so much I want to talk about. But your kind of core of your work is really helping people discover what makes them come alive.
Hmm.
It seems like you have created this niche for yourself to help people identify what makes them tick. What do they really not what do they think they want, but what do they really want?
That's right.
Before we dive into how you do that and how we can do that for ourselves, how do you fall into that type of work? How did you fall into that type of niche? What is that story of how you became the helper that you are?
Mm. Well, in college, I ended up majoring in anthropology, which people always thought was so weird. But I was really drawn to like how do people live their lives? How do they create culture? What do the social dynamics look like? And then when I was in ministry for a long time, and I noticed that in that journey, I started gravitating towards people, their stories, their leadership. And it was that kind of work that was the most engaging for me or made me come alive. So I think at the root of it is just I'm fascinated by people. I really can't get enough of hearing people's stories, hearing their journeys, seeing what is unique about that. I just got off a call with a client and we were talking about, some of her experiences and stories in her past. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've never heard anybody describe this way. That's so cool. So I just think the endless uniqueness of how we've all been created is just, it always brings me joy to dive into that and to have the honor of walking alongside people that are discovering that for themselves. Because even in that conversation, she was like, oh, no one's ever said that to me. I was like, oh, you're really creative. You have a real creative side to you. She's like, I don't think I've ever described myself that way. And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, it's so clear in your story. So again, having the tremendous honor of getting to be invited into people's stories, talk through that with them, help them understand that in a way that makes that feel meaningful and actionable in their lives, it never gets old.
Yeah. Was there somebody that did that for you that helped you discover that in your own self? Like that helped you discover that you want to help people discover that?
I think it's probably a lot of people. So it's like a grouping of people. So I think many people have played that role for me at different points in my life and have been that kind of force for me. Yeah. So I
Mm,
don't know if I could pinpoint it to just one person.
yeah.
Mhm.
So I guess as we start to dive in here, I don't want to start at the negative place, but it's what's coming to mind. Like, what do we get wrong when don't we all want to do what we love? Don't we all want to be passionate about the work we do? Like, why don't we do that? Like, why do you have a job in the first place? Because like, don't we all want to thrive? Don't we all want to be happy? Don't we all want to be in the lane that would make us come most alive? Like,
Hmm.
how do we miss that?
Mm. I think it's actually really helpful to start at what we get wrong because I think it just helps explain a lot of times where this happened. So I started noticing that as I was talking to people, more and more folks would say, "Yeah, I do want to thrive. I do want to discover what's next for me or what it looks like to thrive in this season of my life. But I also feel stuck. I also feel scared. I also feel like I don't know, of the things that I would maybe theorize that I would want, is that actually the right thing for me? And I think a lot of what we get wrong often is that we edit ourselves. We sort of shut down possibilities and we don't give ourselves enough leeway and room and spaciousness to explore what thriving could look like. So I think before the process has even really had a chance to take off, we've already shut it down. Similarly to that conversation that I just had, I saw it happening. Like, oh yeah, I would love to be in this realm. I would love to do this kind of work. I don't know if it's possible. I don't know if I could make money doing that. So it's a lot of barriers that we put on ourselves. The way I talk about this is that, there's primary questions in our lives and there's secondary questions. So primary questions are, where do I thrive? What makes me come alive? What do I truly want? How do I bring that into reality? But I think even before we get there, we ask ourselves all other kinds of questions, like pragmatic questions, like, is that realistic? Competency questions, like, am I really qualified to do that? Like, do I have what it takes? Oops, I probably don't, and again, money questions, capitalistic questions, like, I don't know, is this even a thing? Could I ever afford this? Is this, possible? So I think we end up shutting ourselves down a lot. Sometimes it happens externally, like other people are like, no, no, that will never work for you. But a lot of times we do it to ourselves.
That it's this internal dialogue, the inner voice that tends to throw us off
Hmm.
track is what it sounds like you're saying.
Yeah.
How how do we know that that's even happening? I mean, you know, like it seems to me when a lot of clients come into my office, they don't even know that there's that secondary voice that's discouraging them from being themselves. Let's say
Hmm.
somebody is listening to this and wondering, am I shutting down my own dreams? How do they even know? Because that voice so often sounds like our own voice.
Hmm.
How,
Hmm.
how does one begin to cultivate that practice of listening to their own soul, to that
Yeah.
voice that's telling the truth versus the one that's shutting us down?
Yeah. Well, I think that one, it's important not to put self-judgment on that and just to say, yeah, this is very human
Mm,
and making changes, going after where we're going to thrive. That's not always easy. There's often layers to it. It can feel complex. So it's very human, I think, to struggle with that or wrestle with that, especially, when I talk to people who are in big transitions. Maybe they sort of had a path that was clear and now they're making a big shift. None of that's easy. So I would say one is just recognizing that this is just part of being human and it's okay. So we don't need to feel bad about that or beat ourselves up. But I think that's why I talk about questions so much is one is just to notice like what questions come up when you think about going for what you want and just write them down. Take a blank sheet of paper, write them all down and notice which of these are again pulling you into negative thoughts of like this isn't realistic, you're probably not qualified, who's going to be mad if you do this, all the things that we do to sort of look for permission or assurance of competency or what's practical. And not to say that those things aren't important, like I'm not an advocate of like yeah just pretend anything's possible, like you can be Beyonce if you want to be Beyonce, like no. But
no
I
one
do
can do that.
no, no, no. She's solidly inhabited that lane,
Yes.
as she should. But I think oftentimes what I'm trying to say to people is like hold off on those questions just for a bit. Give yourself a little bit more room to explore. For example, I was talking to someone today, and she was saying, "I would love to give a TED Talk someday."
Mm.
I'm like, okay. And immediately she was like, yeah, but that probably will never happen. And I don't think that is a thing, I probably will never get there. And yeah, I get that. There's some pragmatics with that, right? That's not always possible. Not everyone that wants to do that gets to do that. But, I did say, like, okay, what's behind that? Why do you think that's coming up? Well, there turns out she has a real love of helping people engage with issues of social justice, but finding their practical ways to do that and making those kind of paths clear for, some areas that she's got experience in. And I'm like, that's amazing.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
maybe that will be something that you should listen to because maybe that's going to open up speaking opportunities. Maybe there's other venues for you to do that. And who knows? Maybe it will be at a TED Talk someday.
Yeah.
You never know. Like some people are doing that. My husband just did a TED Talk a couple months ago. It's
Mm.
possible you could end up there too. And she was like, oh, yeah, I guess I never thought of that. So I think that's an example of learning how to listen to those inklings and desires without the quick shutdown of like, who knows? This will probably never happen. It's like, no, 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 no. If you give yourself just a little bit more runway to let it just exist without having to say, like, for sure, I know this is going to happen, I think it goes a long way to even cultivate that listening that you were talking about.
And I don't think we give enough credit to what happens if we just start. So
Yeah,
even if the TED Talk doesn't happen, so often that carrot, if you're chasing it, will unveil maybe the degree to which you actually don't want to teach or inspire, or you find another lane even, or other ways by which you do that. And so it's like, I
exactly.
get, at least in my own story, I've not achieved every goal I've set out to do, but what I've discovered going after those carrots has always been worth it.
Duh, that's so good.
And I
Yeah.
feel like, yeah, it's like even the side quests that come as a result,
Yeah,
usually pretty worth it. So you might as well give yourself that runway to discover what's in between, whether or not you make it there or not.
I love that so
You know.
much. Yeah, I
Um,
think that's so good.
yeah. What has that looked like in your own personal life? Has there
Mm.
been, would you be willing to let us into Tracy's story a little bit as you've gone? I mean, you've worked with NBA teams and big old companies, like your resume looks super dope. Um, I'm sure that wasn't that way right when you got started. You also have a plethora of certifications. It looks very much like my wife's resume, by the way,
Is that right?
which is
Nice.
really fun.
That's cool.
But yeah, what has that looked like between you when you started to realize your dreams and becoming who you are now, and maybe even what are you working toward in the future? And then we'll get back into the nitty gritty. But I'd be curious, just as a human, what has this looked like in your story?
Mm. I mean, I love what you're talking about with quests and exploring because you know, once upon a time I decided I was going to start a blog.
Hmm.
It was super late in the when blogs were trending. It was kind of when
Oh
they were
yeah.
on their way out, right? So I think maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 of my friends read it. It wasn't like very successful at all. But my practicing that and doing that just for the sheer love of it, for the enjoyment of it, for what that sparked in my own learning and curiosity, I look back now and I think that was some of the earliest seeds of me writing a book. But I didn't know it at the time. And it was just like, I don't know, I'm going to try this thing because it sounds interesting. I'm sort of excited to learn it. I don't know much about it. And it was definitely not successful by any stretch of the imagination. But I look back on it and I really value that for what it taught me, for what it started to build in me. So that's been huge in my own story. I talk about this in the book. A lot of what even kicked off this work for me personally was facing a huge, like a career rejection. Like I went up for a big promotion, did not get it, and was pretty much crushed, like devastated. And so that really brought me to a place of stripping everything down into what do I really want? And I don't know if I can say that with much clarity right now. Actually, I feel pretty beat down, pretty disillusioned, pretty disappointed. And it was through that process of learning how to experiment for myself out of this that I found my way. So it felt very organic. It felt very, discovery oriented. I didn't have some master plan that I laid out, but it was through taking those steps that I started to find that, you mentioned working with the NBA team. That happened because we were in COVID lockdown
Mm.
and I was like, I don't know, let me download this app that everyone's talking about called TikTok and I'll talk about some things on here that I am interested in. And I get an email, a few months into this from someone who says that they're the VP of the Miami Heat. And I'm like, okay. My husband is naturally a little more suspicious than me, so he was like, "You better make sure they're not like trying to
Yeah.
scam you or kidnap you or something." So I looked her up. Sure enough, she was who she said she was. We connected, totally hit it off, and she's like, "Yeah, I'd love to hire you to teach our dance team about their strengths and help them in their own professional personal journey." I was like, "Are you kidding me? That is like a dream come true." I didn't even know that was a possibility, didn't know that was a thing that one could do. I'm a dancer, like in
Yes.
my past and in high school, that was my thing. And it just felt like this perfect, bringing together of things that I loved,
Mhm.
but would have had no way to even know that that was a possibility, except for just, like you said, getting out there,
Mhm.
throwing some things out, trying, see what happens. So I'm a huge believer in that.
Tracy, what role? I mean, you mentioned disappointment. You didn't
Mm,
get the promotion.
yeah.
What role does failure and disappointment play on this journey? Like, is it necessary? Like, is it possible to to find your magic without going through like a season of suck? Or is that like just a prerequisite to the whole journey? Like, does something have to suck at some point to do this?
That's a great question. I don't know that I've thought, no one's ever asked me that. And I don't know if I would say it has to, but I certainly think a lot of times it does.
Hmm.
I for sure think it's very helpful to have a season of saying no to what you don't want. And oftentimes that has to precede really having space and clarity about what you do want. Disappointment, I think, is something that's very integral to this process because what I noticed too is, as soon as you open up this idea of like, what do I really want? How am I going to pursue that? That's one of the first thoughts that people come to, which is, well, what if I say that I want this thing? Or what if I go for this and I'm disappointed? And sort of the underlying assumption is, wouldn't that be the worst thing in the world? So I probably shouldn't pay any attention to this at all.
Hmm.
Because what if I end up disappointed? And what I try to help people realize is there are worse things than disappointment. So never exploring, always shutting yourself down. That's not great either. And disappointment, actually, if you learn how to listen to it, I find that it can help you get closer to what thriving looks like for you. If you learn how to be in it and you learn how to tolerate it and not see it as an enemy, it actually can have a lot to say to you. It can have a lot to speak to you. A mentor in that process where after the rejection told me the best advice I've ever heard about disappointment. He was like, list out the specific things that you wanted about that job. What made you so excited? What made you so motivated for it? Don't just keep it general, not just about the job. Name the specific things you wanted to do. And I was like, well, I'd love to develop leaders. I'd love something new. I'm kind of bored in what I'm doing. I want a, broader scope. I actually really want to feel like I'm out of my depth and I don't know what I'm doing. I want that feeling. I want to feel like I'm learning on that level. And it was through that prompting that I realized, yes, the job would have been one way to do that, but there's lots of ways to do that.
Hmm.
And it led to me eventually starting my business. And, so I like to say I didn't get my dream job, but I learned how to create my own dream job by listening to that disappointment, by sitting with it and almost being forced to in that season because it was quite painful and I couldn't escape it. So I felt like there was no other option. I couldn't ignore it.
Hmm.
But I find that when we're so intimidated by disappointment and we are so scared at even the thought of it, that really does not help us grow.
Yeah. So let's say somebody's here wanting to live a life in alignment with their passion, their dreams, their magic. What questions, let's say they're trying to be proactive and not face a big rejection or loss, what questions should they ask right now? What would you tell some young kid going into college or graduating or something? What would you tell them to say, yo, like this is how you can get this process started to orient yourself in the
Hmm.
right way?
Hmm. One of the most foundational questions I think anybody can ask, especially somebody in that position, is to notice what makes you come alive, what brings you deep joy and energy, and what does not. And to recognize that that is not the same for everybody. That is not universal. That's very unique and very specific to you. Oftentimes, what people do when they set about trying to notice something like that, they tend to also discount it quickly and say, well, anyone could have done this, or everyone would feel the same way, or, this is not special. But I think it's really important to recognize that when you find those things, when you find those moments, that it is something very rare, that is something very unique to you in the way that you feel that. I could show you 50 people that would not find that joyful or energizing. It would not be their version of thriving. And I think that's one way that it's very helpful to think more collectively and understand like, yeah, you're one individual. And so how you show up in this world is very unique. And that's not true of other folks around you. And the more that you can see that and value that and own that for yourself, the more I think you have a foundation to understand the right places for you and maybe the wrong places for you. So, one is to notice where you thrive and what brings you joy, and the other is to notice where you don't. And people sometimes have shut that part down as well. And they think, oh, well, I should like this. I see the value in it, or I see why it's important, or this other person expects me to like this. And I think truly to enter into that without any self-judgment or guilt and just say, nope, this is what it is. And that's okay.
What would you say to like, hey, like you give that advice, and then that makes me think of like, so I do a lot of work in the spiritual space, and like kind of traditional gender roles really do have a lot of people, just bound, you know.
Mm,
And I think about like maybe young men who have been taught like it doesn't really matter if it makes you happy, you just have to put your head down and work and provide for your family and eat
mm,
dirt and just do it. Or maybe a mom again to kind of be in these roles of like, no, you've got to have kids and keep house and like whatever, like your joy doesn't really matter. You're here to, procreate and just, whatever. Like, what would you say to like people who are kind of bound by these ideas that it's like, or I think, I mean, I work with a lot of people, like coming out of prison, for example,
mm,
or people that have experienced deep poverty. And it's
mhm,
like this thought of doing what I love, I'm just trying to make some money here.
mm,
Um,
mhm.
so when these thoughts of like when you say joy, or like the Jesuits would say consolations,
Yeah,
like what would you say to somebody where like that's an entirely foreign concept that just feels like privilege, that just feels
sure.
like completely unrealistic?
Hmm.
How would you guide somebody, or what would you say to people in positions like that?
Hmm. Well, first I would say that that's valid. I
Mhm,
think there's some fairness to that critique, and of course, being able to consider where you thrive and what brings you joy, and those kinds of questions do come with a measure of privilege. If you're in a position where you're just trying to survive, if you're in crisis, of course, those are not the questions that are top of mind. So for sure, I would say that's a very valid point, and it's important to recognize that. I also at the same time think that doesn't mean that if you do have that privilege, you shouldn't exercise it, right? So I think you shouldn't shut that down just because it does come with some privilege, but I think it's important to name that. I would say for folks that feel very bound by these ideas of responsibility, so you mentioned like the men who are sort of told this is the way to be manly and
mhm,
don't deviate from that. I think it's all part of being able to think more expansively and think from a place of abundance and to not assume that everything is either or. So I think for somebody who's very caught in that duty and responsibility, that makes sense to me. And I know where that's coming from. And it's, I think, coming from a place of integrity and values, and that's important. So it's not to erase that, but it's just to say, could we think of this more as a both and? Could there be a way for you to embody responsibility and care for the people that are important to you and your community and your family, whilst also making room for things like your joy and your unique way to do that. Could there be a little more leeway to be creative with that? I think so.
Mhm.
Because I'm not out here saying, you know, don't listen to your responsibilities, only do the things that bring you joy, nothing else. I get it. Like we live in the real world. I would never do my taxes, if that was the case. The amount of dread that I feel annually when I have to do that, right? So it's like, yeah, of course, to be an adult, you have to do certain things that aren't just because you enjoy them. However, I find that most people underestimate how much room there can be to make some space for joy, even if it's not the only thing. And we need to think about, responsibility beyond that. So that's part of what I try to help people do is to say, yes, that's important. We want to be mindful of that. Again, I'm not a proponent of just, I read this book once that was like, you should buy the most luxurious car ever because you want to just live your best life. And I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. No, like, I'm not like out here talking like that. I want, I understand the need to be thoughtful and mindful of practical realities. But again, I find that sometimes in the name of doing that, we make it a zero sum thing. Like it has to
Mhm.
all be that or nothing. And I don't think that's the way that we're invited to better ways of moving forward for ourselves.
So somebody's starting to dream. They're starting to think about what makes them come alive. In a world where we're stuck on our phones, we look at the lives of other people. And honestly, I'm asking for myself here. I fall very victim to this. I see the lives of people that I admire, people that host the kind of retreats I want to host,
Mm,
that write the kind of books I want to write,
mhm,
and then I find myself starting to mimic them.
mm,
What's the difference and how do we like what's the difference between like comparison, being inspired by other
mhm,
people, and versus like just going inward? Because I've found myself pulled along very beautifully, being inspired by other folks. I've
mhm,
also found myself very trapped trying to mimic them, and all of a sudden I've abandoned my true
mm.
self.
Yeah.
How does one begin to find their joy? Um, how do we find that line of being inspired versus just comparison? What does that look
Mhm.
like on the journey of starting to explore, as you like to talk about this exploration?
Hmm. Such a good distinction. Have you noticed a difference for you in when it's like a healthy comparison inspiration when it's unhealthy?
Yeah, I think you know, yeah, for sure. I think there's a really interesting line in my story. I think when it becomes almost copying versus being inspired by.
Mm,
And sometimes like I'm a 4 on the Enneagram,
mm.
very proudly a 4, as fours typically are. And they do talk about how fours like to wear costumes a lot. And and
Mhm.
and and there's times where it's like when I'm like, and even very literally when it comes to the clothes I wear, it's like, am I wearing this because I'm trying to present like this breathwork facilitator that I admire? Or am I wearing this because I'm feeling it? And it very
Mm.
many times could be the exact same outfit, but it's like,
Mhm.
what's the source that this is coming from? Or
Yeah.
am I saying this on TikTok because I'm inspired by it, or because I'm trying to copy this person because their
Mm.
TikTok did well?
Mhm.
Um, and very often it's not a different thing that I'm doing,
Sure.
but the soul of it is coming from two different places.
Mm,
Uh,
mhm, mhm.
And so yeah, I think that's a place where I tend to notice it. And my wife she always calls my shit. Like that is not authentic, Tyler. Like for somebody who cares about being that authentic, you are not being yourself. So that's a helpful place to know. I think it's an interesting thought of like, when we're all trying to be other people versus trying to be ourselves. And yet, I don't know. I think in the church world, especially Tracy, it's like I get so many like old pastors, like people that were pastors and maybe they had like a moral failure or they quit,
Mm,
they burned out. Like I think so many pastors, for example, burn out because they never were supposed to be it in the first place.
mm.
But their lives got changed by a pastor who cared for them, or they
Sure.
spend their whole life looking up at the stage at some dude on the stage,
Yeah.
and then they just be them instead of
That's
saying,
right.
oh, like
Yeah.
I'm an artist or I'm a mechanic or whatever. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know the difference of being
Mm,
inspired and but comparing or yeah,
hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting distinction. And I think that's also where comparison, a lot of times in the church, it's so demonized. Like, don't do that. Don't compare yourself. Don't be jealous, and I think, okay, that's not helpful because it's just, again, part of our human experience. And I think one of those things also, if you can listen to it, it can tell you a lot about what might be right for you, what not. But I do think that that inner place, I tend to think that sometimes people get caught up in that and they don't know, oh, is this coming from the right motivation? Is this coming from the wrong motivation? Like, is this imitation or is this inspiration? Some of that's very hard to think through.
Mhm.
I don't know that that's something that you come to clarity about yourself by only thinking about it. I tend to think that, kind of like we were talking about, if you start to take some steps into it, your body will tell you.
Mhm. Mhm.
Your soul speaking through your body will tell you, like, is this the right thing for you? Are you pursuing this because this is something you're meant to explore, or is this something that it's just falling into like a false version of yourself? And that's something I think that because you take a step and you experiment and you notice how it comes out in your embodied
Yeah.
life versus like, yeah, I need to sit here and have my perfect motivation and then I can do something about it. I find that
Yep.
usually leaves people feeling pretty stuck.
Yeah. So again, this manifestation of our dreams very much comes by way of moving,
Hmm.
of just doing something,
Yeah.
living life,
Yeah.
ups and downs. Um, this has unlocked so many questions I want to ask. I'm taking so many notes. Um, let's say Tracy, somebody they have discovered a source of joy. There's a beacon out there. This is their true self has been illuminated to some degree. Um, what's the difference, or how does somebody begin to start going toward this, being in flow, saying, "Yep, like this is happening. I'm going towards this." Because
Hmm.
if I've heard you say anything today, it's you got to move. You got to go toward it.
Hmm.
And yet, we also find people I can think about, for example, when I started my coffee company and it was going so well, and I was in national news and traveling the world, and I was also sleeping at my coffee shop, not coming home to my wife.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I was tired and I was sick and I wasn't eating. And when I was eating, it was bad. And like, what's this difference of like pursuing the dream? Like, how would you guide your clients in pursuing the dream, building upon the magic, but not just grinding, hustle culture,
Hmm.
ruining ourselves in
Hmm.
pursuit of this magic? What does
Hmm.
that look like for you and your clients as we go towards these things that we really do love? My coffee shop dream was a good one. And it
Yeah.
was an alignment for me at the time. And yet I didn't do it very well, to my own
Hmm.
detriment. How do we
Hmm.
how do we go about something being passionate and feeling alive without doing damage?
Hmm. I think that's such an interesting question because you're making, pointing out the difference between something beautiful and something inspiring, and then how you go about pursuing it. And I think that's where I really value having the journey and the process of pursuing your dreams also come out of a place of your thriving and your joy. And so I think one is being able to know that for yourself and being able to catch that warning sign of like, okay, this is now going into a place of grinding, a place of overextension. We can all have seasons like that, but I am somebody who I really value staying centered and
Mhm.
coming out of a way of pursuing our dreams and our work through rest and through
Mhm.
openness rather than like just grinding yourself into the floor. So yeah, I think that that's where people can be helped by understanding that there's multiple paths to pursue your dreams. Oftentimes, I think this is where we mix up means and end. like we think the means are the end. Like this is the only way to pursue, like, it becomes one and the same, right? My dream of a beautiful coffee space and coffee company, it means grinding myself into the ground, be like, no, 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 no. That's a way, but there's multiple ways, and it's just a means to an end. It's not the end. So that's where I think it is really, it becomes very generative if you can think through what is your true desire underneath this? What is your true want here? What is your longing? What's your true dream? Okay,
Mhm.
and learning how to separate that from the means to get there.
Mhm.
And I find that people are often much more helped by asking, what's your best means? Because that's another area where I think we really fall into copying,
Mhm.
is to say, like, oh, it has to look like this because if this person did it that way. And being able to say, no, actually, I think part of wisdom is knowing that your best way to do it might look really different than someone else's. So let's take a step back. Let's think about where the bright spots have been. How have you pursued this work in a way that brings you the most joy and light and doesn't pull you into like a place of overextension? Let's amplify that and let's try to minimize the things that are pulling you towards kind of
Mhm.
overdoing it. So I think again that switching of means and ends, it's very simple, but I think that often we confuse the two and then it makes our thinking sort of muddled.
Yep. It makes me think of when I was more in the coffee industry, so many people, I'd get an email, 3 or 4 times a week. Hey, Tyler, I want to open a coffee company.
Mm,
And I really learned to ask some really interesting questions. But, a lot of times I'd ask them about the project, and they would say things like, well, this is the interior design and this is the equipment we'll have and this is the band we'll have in the corner or whatever.
yeah.
And I'll say, you didn't tell me anything about like human
Mm,
resources. You didn't tell me anything about like profit and loss. You didn't
yeah.
tell me how you're not going to waste milk, with every drink. Like it sounds like you're really into interior design.
Hmm.
Or it sounds like you're actually really into like indie music. Like,
Yeah.
what if you did like a house show in your backyard and you didn't have to
Mm,
raise $1 million? Because it doesn't sound like you want to run a company. Like,
yeah.
and it's like the work is infinitely harder when, again, it's like it was close. And the only way they saw to gather community was a coffee shop. When, again, there's a lot of ways to gather community.
That's right.
And so I at first I always felt like I'm a dream crusher here, but then I really felt like I was empowering these people, saying like most people, and I was one of them, actually don't want to run a company. I'm not a CEO. I'm
Mm,
not like I'm entrepreneurial, but I'm not an entrepreneur.
mm,
And yeah, to get clarity on that really does change. Oh yeah, let's still create beautiful spaces. Let's gather
mm,
people. Let's have music or even make like the amount of people that I've worked with that now have coffee clubs, where they
mm.
do coffee at their house or
I
in their
love that.
driveway and serving tamales.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so
Oh,
awesome.
so good.
By
Yeah.
the way, I grew up I'm New Mexican and so there's this great
Mm,
intersection of just like anyways, I love tamales.
good. Yeah.
Um
You got to come.
yeah, I really, really appreciate that.
I love that.
You mentioned your husband doing a TED Talk, and it made me think about my wife and I's journey. She recently just quit her job to support me in chasing some of my dreams.
Oh, wow.
And what does this look like in partnership? There have been times in my marriage, and with a lot of people I work with as a spiritual director, where not always the partner gets the other person or the dreams the other person
Mm,
is pursuing,
yeah.
or they do but they don't know how to support and help. When we're talking
Mm,
about finding magic and supporting one another and becoming our best selves, what does
yeah.
that look like in a marriage and in a partnership?
It's a great question. No one has asked me that so far. I love that. There's no way I'd be able to do anything that I've done without his support. So he's probably my biggest cheerleader. One of my earliest experiments or things that I was pursuing was I decided to start a women's retreat with two of my best friends. I was like, this sounds fun. Let's gather some women and do some cool stuff together. And I remember the day that I was driving out on my way, car full of stuff to go set up. And he was standing in the driveway, like cheering for me, like hands over his head. Like that's who he is. He's like, I have no bigger fan in my life.
What a sweetie.
Yeah,
Oh.
he's amazing. He's amazing. So for sure, there's no way I could not imagine that for myself. Maybe some people can do it. There's no way I could do anything creative or
Mhm.
entrepreneurial or pursue any of my dreams without that kind of support. There was one point where I was getting close to getting a job offer and it would have pulled me away from, starting my business and doing the work that I do now. And he was legit kind of mad, like, I don't think you should do that. I don't want you to do that. I
Mhm.
think you should continue to bet on yourself and go for it. And so he's always kind of had that energy in my life. Yeah, so that's been my experience. I know each, marriage is unique. So I could never speak for other folks, but that's definitely been true for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, so let's so you wrote a book all about this.
Yeah.
Um, Tell us a little bit about the book, how the book works, the ways in which the book illuminates this path for people, and how you tend to guide people through this process of discovering their magic,
Hmm.
becoming their best, most true self.
Hmm. The book is called The Magic of Knowing What You Want,
Hmm.
and it came out of my work with people. So it was individuals having these conversations. Well, it first came out of my own process. So I had to sort of piece my life back together after that rejection experience. And then I noticed in my work with clients, people would come to me and say similar things like, I don't know what I want. I don't even know how to start looking for the next thing because I have no idea what I even want to begin with. So, how do I start when I don't really know what I'm even aiming for? And I would listen to them and say, I know exactly how you're feeling. I've been there myself. I know those questions. I know that experience.
Yeah.
Let's try this together. And I would offer, my thoughts of like, okay, based on what you told me, based on your story, let's do these things together and let's talk about them and let's
Mhm.
process that together and together come up with next steps. And then, to my amazement, I noticed, wow, that worked. You got to a place of clarity and you found your way to do it. You found your way to bring it about. And I was kind of floored by that. And then I noticed over time doing this more and more that what I was recommending was becoming more and more similar. So in the beginning, I would sort of tailor it to each person, make it very custom. And then after a lot of rounds of this, I noticed like, oh, I'm offering the same thing now.
Mhm.
So this is just, I think, a process that I'm going to propose, from the get-go. So that's the basis of the book is really writing that out and writing out that process because I noticed that, there's some folks that can't access coaching in that way. And so I wanted to put it into book form. So I knew that from the outset that I would be sharing some of those stories, what's worked for those folks, what that process looks like. I think what I was surprised by was I didn't expect to put my own story in there so much and my own wrestling and my own, hitting that, pit in my life and what I had to do to wrestle with these things in my life. But I felt like I couldn't do it justice without speaking from that inner place myself and only highlighting the stories of other people. And I think it also became a way to process and distill some of the values and ethos behind why I think this work is important and how it isn't selfish. It isn't just individualism. It actually is a place that can be rooted in our care for our communities and what we have to offer to one another and
Mhm.
actually see it from that kind of lens rather than just, I think what people do a lot of times is to say like, oh, well, that's frivolous or that's selfish, like that's just about me. And what I've noticed in the people that I've worked with is no, actually that's not the case. Is when you do this work for yourself, you have your best gifts to offer to the world. And it's actually a tremendous coming together of who you are and what you have to bring to
Yeah.
the world. So I can never quote enough the Howard Thurman quote that talks
Mm.
about don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive and go do that because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And I believe that to the core of my bones because I've seen
Yes.
it over and over and over again. And so that really was the impetus from
Mhm.
to want to write this book.
Yeah. Ugh, that's so good. Um, my mind just went to a million different places. Hmm. What would you say to someone who might say, um, my heart is deceitful, Tyler. I've been told, don't listen to my soul. Don't listen to my inner life. That thing either has led me astray before. I've been in prison. I'm an addict. Me
Mm.
listening to my own self has not, like, sometimes in AA they say your best thinking is what got you here. Um, they'll say that. But
Mm.
also many people that have come from the tradition I grew up in were told, don't
Sure.
listen to your inner world.
Sure.
Um,
Yes.
what do you say to those people
Hmm.
or to that message?
I wrote a whole chapter on this tension
Nice.
because I felt it so strongly for myself.
Mhm.
And I felt, I had one person interview me and say, "Why did you write this chapter? Why didn't you just jump in? Like, why did you spend all this time like debating whether this is helpful and generative or if it's just selfish and bad?" I was like, because I couldn't get past it. This was definitely a message I've been instilled with, and I had to unpack it. And what I say to that is that yes, there is a way that our desires can lead us astray. Listening to ourselves can lead to harm to ourselves and to other people. That's real. But that is not the only way that listening to our desires can be harmful. And that there's another side to it where we end up self erasing, where we end up minimizing ourselves, where we end up not listening to the sacred inklings that we need to be paying attention to, that is real as well. But we're usually only taught to notice the negative or to kind of point out what's bad about listening to ourselves. And we aren't also coupling that with the reality that can also lead to profound good.
Yes.
So I think to have a more balanced, thoughtful approach, and again, to listen to wisdom is to say both of those can be true. And if you are someone who has been in recovery, been in healing, grown, there is more to you than just one side.
Mhm.
And there's more capable to come out of listening to this part of yourself than only harm,
Mhm.
even if that's been true in the past.
Mhm. I have little kids. I
Mm.
have a 2-year-old little girl, and I have a
Oh,
6-year-old boy,
amazing.
and I want him to be him.
Mm.
And it's really like we are seeming in some many ways we're very different. We're both very hospitable, very gentle people by and large, but he seems to be very much of the engineering mind of the like he loves to fall he calls them constructions, not instructions, but he wants the constructions and he wants to fall. And I've never met a rule, Tracy, that I won't break at least twice. Um, how do we instill this in little people? I've
Mm.
got
Mhm.
kids. Like, what if my kid could grow up and didn't need to hire you as a coach? How do I install this so my kids can just know who they are and what they
Mm.
want to be?
Mhm.
What do we as parents do to make this a reality for younger people so that
Yeah.
I didn't have to, like I said, spend thousands of dollars on coaching and getting help, which by the way was entirely worth it. I would do it over and over and over again.
Sure.
But yeah, how do we help the people around us, especially maybe my kids,
Yeah.
find their magic?
Mm. Well, I think a big piece of it is doing exactly what you just did, which is noticing who he is,
Hmm.
noticing where he gravitates,
Hmm.
what he is interested in, where his curiosity lies, and where he tends to
Hmm.
thrive, what brings him to life, and how that might be different than you.
Hmm.
I think that's really profound that you're noticing, like, okay, we're similar in some ways,
Hmm.
and you're also your own person, which that in and of itself was not, a luxury that everyone has. A lot of people are sort of told, like prescriptively, like, this is what you're going to be about, this is what you're going to do, this is what we expect of you. And so I think A is creating the space, and B is noticing, same as I would tell a 20-year-old, is like notice where your kiddo comes to life.
Hmm.
What brings them joy? What do they ask about? What are they curious about? You have the benefit of multiple kids. So you get to see this in stark
Mhm.
relief. You get to see like,
Mhm.
oh, you are different people
Mhm.
from each other. You have us as parents, but you're unique from each other even.
Mhm.
And I think to begin to notice that and help draw your kids' attention to that.
Mhm.
So being able to affirm
Mhm.
that and to notice, like, hey, I notice this about you. I love that.
Mhm.
That alone is such a gift, that holding that curiosity for someone and that observation to say, I notice that you ask questions in this way, or I notice that you think about things like this, or I notice you're really great at taking a complicated set of instructions and
Mhm.
bringing them to life. That's amazing. Not everybody likes that. Not everybody can do that.
Mhm.
So I remember pointing out to one of my kids are much older. So when my oldest is 18 and my younger one is 14, but I feel like
Mhm.
it was just yesterday that they were little.
Yeah.
And you get to see this unfold. And I think in a lot of ways, like who they are, I saw it at those early stages, like who they've continued to develop to be. So there's those clues, and to say, huh, I wonder about this for you. I notice this for you. I wonder what you'll do with that.
Yeah.
And I think having that, it's the observation, and then the space to say, what do you think of that? Like, what do you want to do with this? What do you like about it? Or
Mhm.
what do you notice about it? Because I think just having that ability alone to articulate what that is huge.
Wow.
So many of the people that are coming to this later in their lives, they've never even been given words
Mm-mm.
to notice these things about
Mhm.
themselves. So that I think is a huge head start.
Yeah. How much of this work, Tracy, is connected to like our actual jobs and the things that make money?
Mm-hmm.
Like so many people, like I get a lot of clients, for example, that are making beautiful art. They
Yeah.
are thriving. Maybe they're even publishing books, or they
Mm-hmm.
are, they're 3 years in a row champions of their soccer, adult league soccer team, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But they're like, I hate my job, and like
Mm-hmm.
there's the passion is outside of it,
Yep.
but the job sucks, and they're like, my life sucks because my job sucks. I'm like, what? Like,
Yep.
or vice versa. How
Mm-hmm.
much of like finding the magic of doing what we love and our best selves has to do with our vocation, like the jobs we, are like our vocational job, the moneymaker
Mm-hmm.
versus not? How much of that should we pay attention to? Is it okay to have a job we hate? That, like how do you navigate that with people? I'm privileged to honestly do what I love.
Right.
And it is a giant privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that's just not the case for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
How do you speak into that for folks
Mm-hmm.
wondering questions like that?
Such a good practical question. I have hit hard unsubscribe from the thinking that's like the most important thing about who you are in the world is what you get paid to do. So I think once you unhook from that,
Mm-hmm.
it creates so much more room. So the kind of person that you're talking about who maybe they have a day job that pays their bills, but they don't particularly love it, but they are out here in the world creating something beautiful, being creative, showing up in a way that feels really wonderful and creative and all the things, right? I think that is fantastic. I don't think we give enough credit to that. I don't think we value that enough. And so sometimes the mind shift is just being able to say that's valid.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good way to approach life. I actually call that a bounded approach to your work because it's helpful to understand what your job does for you and what it doesn't do for you, and to have good boundaries around it, and also to recognize that your job doesn't have to fulfill every need that you have, every part of you, every expression of who you're meant to be. You can have multiple buckets,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak. You can have multiple things that house that. Like, so example, my husband, one Halloween, he went all out doing a handmade. Boba Fett costume for my son. He's a
Oh,
huge Star Wars nerd to begin with. And then my younger son was like, I want to be Boba Fett. And he was like, bet. And he went so hardcore, like
oh,
multiple trips to Home Depot to get the right shade of green, like the whole thing. I wish I could show you a picture right now. You would die.
I love
It
this
was amazing,
so
right?
much. I have my Yoda Buddha right
Oh,
here.
nice.
I have my one of my lightsabers right up here.
Oh, so
Also,
cool.
you can kind of see the Millennium Falcon also
Oh,
right there.
nice. Nice.
Anyways, we could go there. So
You and him would have a lot to talk
I
about.
love
And with
that.
Star
Okay.
Wars and coffee, you'd be great, get along great.
Love it. Okay, keep going. He
So
goes all in.
he goes all in on this. And, his reflection on the end of that was like, I really loved building something with my hands. That
Mhm.
was so cool, um, but that's not something he does for his job necessarily. That's not something that paid him any money. But does that make it less valuable or less important? Like, no, I don't think so. And I think it's putting too much on a job to say it has to fulfill every need. As you said, some of us get to do what we love and get paid to do that. And I think I would say to people, is if you want that, if that's something, if you're somebody who is really drawn to the idea of doing that, I think that's worth paying attention to. So I also don't think you should resign yourself to like, oh, no, 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 I won't get to experience that. I think like, oh, if you're somebody who really likes that idea, I am. I like that. I want that. But I talk to some people who are like, I don't want that. I actually like that, the creative thing that I do. It's just a passion. It's just something I do. There's not money attached to it. It isn't my profession. It isn't anything that pays a bill. I like that. I want it to exist in that space. And I'm like, great.
Yes.
Then that's wonderful. So I think it requires us collectively as a society to have more models of what it looks like to show up in a way that's authentic
Yep.
and who we are and creative. And it's, I think, allowing for the fact that we don't all have to have the same model for it to be valid. And again, just because something pays you. Now, I would say if someone's like, I hate my job and it's draining, then it could be like, okay, let's help you find a version of that that isn't quite so draining, that isn't quite so terrible. And sometimes people get stuck because they're like, well, no job's perfect. Grass is always greener on the other side. I'm like, no, legitimately, sometimes the grass is greener on the other side.
Mhm.
You should do some exploration so you don't stay stuck in a bad or
Yeah.
toxic situation if you don't have to.
Yes.
But yeah,
Yeah, my little brother, he was the first interview I did on this podcast, and
nice.
his story is really crazy. He was had a full ride studying music, and but his addiction took all that away from him,
Mm,
and now he ended up homeless, and then
mm.
he got a job at Wells Fargo while he was homeless, and
Wow.
now he's like a big manager and wears a suit every day and all this. And I asked him the same question because he is like creative, musician, all
Mm,
this. And he said, I had this awakening when I realized I'm only at my work for 8 hours of the day. It's actually one of the smallest pieces of the pie I have in a 24-hour day.
mm.
And he's like, and when I stopped thinking about that 8 to 9 hours, and I started thinking about the whole rest of that, now some of that is sleeping, but still, and he's
Mhm.
like, I still have more time to do fun things than work. It's actually one of the
Yeah.
smallest slices, and he
Mm.
just inverted it, and he does. He's in a community band, and he has season tickets to the soccer team, and he does comic books and the whole thing. And
So cool.
um,
I
this
love
has been
that.
so good. I
Mm.
I feel just so awake, and I am so thankful for this. Um, as we start to wrap up here, like you shared a lot here. I'd be curious, like if you could distill your life's message down just to like a core phrase or sentence or image, whether it has to do with your book and your work or just in general. Like what is Tracy's message for the world that has been put into you by the divine to spread?
I think it would be, as far as I understand it at this point in my life, that who you've been created to be is really good
Mhm.
and worth celebrating and a gift to the world.
Yes. Yes, that's so good. Where where Tracy can people buy your book? Where can they find you? Where can they support you or maybe even work with you? Give us those plugs. You definitely deserve it.
Let's see. The book is anywhere you want to buy books,
Mhm.
so it's available everywhere.
The
I
magic of knowing what you want.
Yes, The Magic of Knowing What You Want, a practical guide to unearthing the wisdom of your desires. That is what it is called.
Mhm.
I'm, on the internet. I'm on Instagram at traceyg.me. That's also my website. And those are some of the main places that I show up online. I do have on my website, it's traceyg.me/template. And there's a template I like to use to help people find goals that feel good and that come out of that sort of healthy generative place. So that's something, a resource that sometimes people find helpful. So those are some of the main places.
Love it. And I'll put all those obviously in the show notes. Also, um, for those of you who have listened to this point, the first person to DM me the word magic on Instagram, I will mail you Tracy's book. So the first person to DM me magic, my Instagram is the Tyler, ThuhTyler. First person to DM me magic, I will mail you Tracy's book. So thanks for listening this far, and you can get that copy from me. Yeah, Tracy, thanks for spending some time here.
Thanks so much, Tyler.
Yeah, I can't wait to do it again someday, and thanks for all the good work you do in this world.
Same to you.